Karen Weatherbottom stood in her perfectly manicured front yard at 6:47 am, clutching her laminated HOA violation notice like a weapon, when she witnessed what could only be described as the crime of the century. Her neighbor, that insufferable Mike Henderson, was actually draining his pool. Not just skimming leaves or adjusting chemicals, completely emptying it, the water cascading into the storm drains like liquid rebellion against everything the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association stood for. "That's our water," she shrieked, her voice carrying across the pristine suburb with the force of a fire siren. 3 joggers stopped mid-stride, a gardener dropped his hedge trimmer, and Mrs. Chen's Yorkshire Terrier began barking in what Karen interpreted as solidarity. "Mike Henderson, you stop this instant." But Mike, that absolute anarchist, simply waved from behind his pool equipment, wearing swim trunks and a tank top at an hour when respectable people wore robes. Karen's perfectly straightened hair began to frizz with indignation as she watched thousands of gallons disappear. Water that could have been used for the HOA's prized rose garden, water that belonged to the community. Within minutes, Karen had transformed from concerned neighbor to full-blown detective. She speed-dialed Officer Martinez, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "There's a theft in progress at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. A massive theft of community resources. I need immediate assistance." "Ma'am, what exactly is being stolen?" "Water. Gallons and gallons of our water. He's draining his pool and stealing our property values in the process." The third shocking moment came when Karen realized Mike wasn't just draining the pool. He was renovating it. Without HOA approval, without architectural committee oversight, without her permission. Karen had been HOA president for 3 consecutive terms, a position she campaigned for with the intensity of someone running for Congress. She knew every bylaw, every covenant, every single regulation that governed their 200-home community. Mike Henderson was violating at least 17 different codes, and she had the documentation to prove it. As she marched toward Mike's property, her sensible flats clicking against the sidewalk like a metronome of doom, Karen mentally catalogued every infraction. Unapproved construction activity. Section 4.7. Improper disposal of pool water. Section 8.2. Disturbance of community peace before 8 am. Section 12.1. "Mike Henderson," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "By the authority vested in me by the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, I'm ordering you to cease and desist this illegal activity immediately." Mike looked up from his pool pump, genuinely confused. "Karen, it's my pool. I'm just replacing the liner. Your pool sits on community land, uses community utilities, and affects community property values. That makes it my business." Karen's face had progressed from pink to red to a shade that matched her nail polish. "And you're destroying our ecosystem by dumping chlorinated water into the storm drains." The confrontation escalated when Mike laughed, actually laughed, at her authority. That's when Karen knew she was dealing with a true criminal mastermind. By noon, Karen had assembled what she privately called her emergency response team, a coalition of neighborhood allies who understood the serious nature of Mike's crimes. Gladys from the architectural committee, Harold from landscaping oversight, and Beth, the treasurer who knew exactly how much the community pool maintenance budget had increased due to water waste like Mike's. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen announced from her dining room, which she converted into a war room complete with printed satellite images of Mike's property, "we are facing an unprecedented attack on our community's values." The evidence was overwhelming. Mike had not only drained his pool without permit, but he'd also failed to notify the Water Management Committee, violated the 72-hour advance construction notice requirement, and most egregiously, ignored Karen's direct order to stop. "I've contacted the city," Harold reported, adjusting his reading glasses. "Pool draining requires environmental permits for chlorinated water disposal. And the noise ordinance violations started at 6:30 am, added Beth, consulting her meticulous notes. "I documented every mechanical sound." But Karen was already 3 steps ahead. She'd discovered Mike's real plan through careful surveillance, standing at her kitchen window with binoculars was not spying, it was community oversight. He wasn't just replacing a liner, he was installing a new filtration system, updating the decking, and adding features that would undoubtedly increase his property value at the expense of neighborhood harmony. 47 decibels at property line, she dictated into her phone, crouched behind her prize-winning azaleas. 49 decibels near the Henderson mailbox, clear violation of community sound ordinances. But as Karen conducted her surveillance, she noticed something that chilled her to the bone. Other neighbors were actually admiring Mike's pool. Mrs. Patterson had stopped to chat with him over the fence. The Johnsons' teenage daughter had asked if she could bring friends over when it was finished. Mike was building a coalition. The realization hit Karen like a physical blow. This wasn't just about one man's pool anymore. Mike was systematically undermining her authority by making people want to break the rules. He was showing them what was possible when HOA standards were ignored, and worse, making it look appealing. Friday evening, Karen made her final preparations. She'd arranged for Officer Martinez to be on standby for noise complaints. She'd prepared legal documentation for every violation Mike had committed. She even researched precedent cases where HOA authority had been upheld against rogue homeowners. But as she watched Mike test his new pool lights, creating what even Karen had to admit was a beautiful ambient glow in his backyard, she felt something unexpected doubt. What if she was wrong? What if Mike's improvements actually helped property values? What if her rigid enforcement of HOA rules was making her the villain of this story? The thought lasted exactly 37 seconds before Karen crushed it with the iron will that had made her the most effective HOA president in Meadowbrook Estates history. Mike Henderson had chosen his path. Now Karen would show him the consequences of defying her authority. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made pool parties seem like destiny. Karen positioned herself at her kitchen window by 7 a.m., armed with her notebook, camera, and the speed dial number for code enforcement. Mike's grand opening was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving Karen plenty of time to document pre-party violations. At 8:15 a.m., the first guests arrived early to help set up. Karen's blood pressure spiked as she realized Mike had invited the Kowalskis, the Patels, and worst of all, the new family from Elm Street who hadn't yet learned proper Meadowbrook Estates protocol. Robert, she called to her husband, who was attempting to enjoy his Saturday morning coffee. They're turning this into a block party without proper permits. By 10 a.m., Karen had documented 6 violations: unauthorized assembly, excessive vehicle parking, music above acceptable decibel levels, and the installation of temporary party structures, an inflatable slide, without architectural committee approval. But what truly sent Karen into overdrive was the moment she realized Mike had solved his pool renovation without a single violation fine, without bowing to HOA pressure, and without acknowledging her authority in any meaningful way. He had simply succeeded. At 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the official party start time, Karen made her move. She called Officer Martinez with her most urgent voice. There's a massive property violation in progress, possible safety hazards, and definitely noise ordinance violations. I need immediate police response. When Officer Martinez arrived at 2:15 p.m., he found Karen standing on Mike's sidewalk with a clipboard, wearing what she considered her official business outfit, and pointing at various infractions like a traffic cop at a multi-car accident. "Ma'am, I see a family having a pool party. Officer, you're looking at 17 distinct HOA violations, 3 city code infractions, and 1 case of deliberate community disruption," Karen replied, handing him her comprehensive violation report. That's when Mike emerged from his backyard, dripping wet and genuinely happy, carrying a plate of barbecue for the officer. "Hey, Martinez. Thanks for stopping by. Want a burger?" Karen watched in growing horror as Officer Martinez actually smiled at Mike, accepted the food, and began chatting about the beautiful pool renovation. Her carefully constructed case was dissolving into neighborly conversation. "The pool looks great, Henderson. Very professional job." "Thanks. The kids are loving the new slide feature." Mike Henderson. Karen's voice cut through their casual chat like a sword. You are in violation of sections 4.7, 8.2, 12.1, 15.3, and 22.8 of the Meadowbrook Estates Community Guidelines. This isn't about a pool, Karen declared, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This is about precedent. If we let Mike Henderson ignore HOA authority, what's next? Unlicensed garden gnomes? Unauthorized mailbox colors? Complete anarchy? The team nodded gravely. They'd seen what happened in Sunset Meadows when their HOA got soft. Property values dropped 3% in a single quarter. Karen's first counter-strike was a formal complaint to the city planning department. Her second was a cease and desist letter hand-delivered by registered mail. Her third was calling her nephew Danny, who worked in code enforcement, and owed her a favor from when she'd helped him get his apartment. But Mike, showing a disturbing lack of respect for proper channels, continued working. Karen watched from her window as contractors arrived with new equipment, as tile samples were delivered, as Mike transformed his backyard into what could only be described as a personal oasis that would make every other pool in the neighborhood look shabby by comparison. That's when Karen realized Mike's true motive. He was trying to become the new pool standard in Meadowbrook Estates. He was attempting a hostile takeover of neighborhood aesthetics. We need the police, she announced to her emergency team. This has moved beyond HOA jurisdiction into criminal territory. When Officer Martinez finally arrived that afternoon, 2 hours after Karen's increasingly frantic calls, she was ready with a comprehensive presentation. Officer, I'm documenting theft of community resources, violation of municipal codes, and conspiracy to damage property values, she began, handing him a 3-inch binder of evidence. Mrs. Witherbottom, from what I can see, your neighbor is renovating his pool, without permits, without authorization, without respect for community standards. Karen's voice cracked with emotion. He's undermining everything we've worked to build here. The officer looked genuinely puzzled, which Karen interpreted as him being overwhelmed by the complexity of Mike's crimes. By Wednesday, Karen had declared total war. Mike's continued defiance had pushed her beyond normal HOA protocols into what she considered emergency preservation mode. She documented 17 separate violations, filed complaints with 3 different city departments, and started a petition among neighbors to have Mike's pool project declared a community nuisance. But Mike, showing a disturbing pattern of escalation, had brought in a professional pool company. Karen watched in horror as workers installed what appeared to be a waterfall feature that would undoubtedly create noise pollution and attract wildlife that would disrupt the carefully maintained ecosystem of Meadowbrook Estates. This is psychological warfare, Karen explained to her increasingly concerned husband, Robert. He's trying to make everyone else's pools look inferior. It's a classic property value manipulation tactic. Robert, who'd learned over 23 years of marriage to nod supportively during Karen's crusades, suggested maybe they could just focus on their own backyard. Robert, you don't understand. If we don't stop Mike now, next month it'll be someone else installing unauthorized deck extensions. Then someone will want to paint their shutters an unapproved color. Before you know it, Meadowbrook Estates will look like Karen shuddered, like Riverside Commons. The mention of their rival neighborhood, with its relaxed HOA standards and eclectic architectural choices, was enough to bring Robert back to the cause. Karen's intelligence gathering had revealed that Mike was planning a pool party for the following weekend. Not just any pool party, but what her sources, Glady's had excellent hearing and a strategic hedge location, described as a grand opening celebration. The audacity was breathtaking. Thursday morning brought Karen's masterstroke. She discovered that Mike's new pool equipment exceeded the noise decibel limits established in Section 15.3 of the Community Guidelines. Armed with a professional sound meter borrowed from her nephew Danny, Karen began documenting acoustic violations. Both men turned to look at her, and in that moment, Karen realized she'd become something she'd never intended to be, the neighborhood villain. Mike's response was gentle but firm. Karen, I checked every permit requirement. I filed the right paperwork. I even invited you to the party. He gestured toward the backyard, where neighbors were laughing, children were playing, and everyone was having exactly the kind of community gathering the HOA was supposed to encourage. You invited me. The invitation's been in your mailbox since Monday. Karen felt something crumble inside her chest. She'd been so focused on violations and authority that she'd missed the actual invitation. Mike wasn't trying to undermine the community. He was trying to bring it together. But as Officer Martinez headed back to his patrol car, and as the sounds of the pool party continued behind Mike's fence, Karen realized something crucial. She might have lost this battle, but the war for Meadowbrook Estate's future was just beginning. Because now other neighbors had seen what was possible when HOA rules were flexible. And Karen Weatherbottom, 3-term HOA president and guardian of community standards, was going to have to decide what kind of neighbor she really wanted to be. As she walked back to her house, Karen glanced at her perfectly maintained, but somehow empty backyard, then back at Mike's fence, where the sounds of community and joy spilled over into the evening air. For the first time in 3 years, Karen Weatherbottom wondered if she'd been fighting the wrong enemy all along.